opened up my phone, and this is one of these deceptions that are going across the internet that we need to be aware of, certainly, and not swept up by, because, is this going to play? I'm not going to play the whole thing, but.
Brothers and sisters, today I bring you a message not to debate, but to illuminate. A message not to divide, but to open your eyes to a movement many have heard of, yet few truly understand. You may have passed their churches. You may have heard whispers of their beliefs. But today, I want to show you 7 powerful facts about the Seventh-day Adventist Church that many don't know, and by the end, you'll see why this movement is more than just a denomination. It is a calling. It is a prophetic voice in the wilderness of confusion. It is a reminder that the Bible is still the foundation of truth, the original Sabbath, a forgotten commandment reclaimed. In a world where traditions often overshadow truth, the Seventh-day Adventist Church has taken a bold and countercultural stand on one of the 10 commandments that many...
Okay, so it goes on to espouse a lot of truth. However, it was not Billy Graham. It was somebody had typed up, somebody perhaps of the Seventh-day Adventist Church had typed up a profound presentation and had AI generate a Billy Graham voiceover to read it. Obviously, there was no video. 30 years ago, I'm sure there would have been a great... if Billy Graham had converted to SDA, I think a few people would know. He was familiar with some SDAs, and there was, I guess, somebody that had worked with him, and a lot of mythology about Billy. A very profound speaker, yeah. However, no, had zero affiliation virtually with the SDA Church. And this is an example of bearing false witness. The person who generated this video puts Billy Graham's name on it, slaps a whole bunch of SDA theology into this presentation, and peddles it as if it was real. This is, I mean, glaring deception, and it's a problem even though you're presenting truth. It doesn't matter, because you are misrepresenting Billy Graham and the Seventh-day Adventist Church at the same time. So anybody, if you guys ever come across this stuff, feel free to jump into the comments section and leave a thumbs down and a comment, because these types of things are, to me, absolutely abhorrent and unacceptable. The last time I checked on this one, there was there's 48,000 views. There's 1,300 likes. 1 thumbs down. That was me. I got Ted talked me into that one. But there's 414 comments. Now, I didn't go through all 414. However, the overwhelming multitude of the ones that I did read were all SDAs saying, "So proud of Billy Graham. So proud to be an SDA." And, okay, but let's really boil this down to what it is. It's deception. It's misrepresenting. It's false. And we should be on our guard about these deceptions, because they're only going to get better. They're only going to get, I mean, yeah, I can tell that that's not Billy Graham's voice. I've heard Billy Graham's voice enough times to say there's something just slightly off. And nowadays you can see videos of like Denzel Washington speaking profoundly about the SDA church. His mouth isn't really going along with the words coming out of the video. There's slight things that are off, but they're deceptions. Even though it's truth, it's still deceptive. Because how would you like to be brought into a church under false pretenses? How many of you have been into a church under false pretenses? I'd have to say that most of us who are converts came out of churches because of false pretenses that we left to come into truth. So, beyond that, hey, you can get rid of that, Ted. I got to do the up thing? Okay. All right, cool. So then what do I got to do when I got this? All right, well, when I get to the next slide, I'll figure if it doesn't change, well, whatever. Yeah, technology, woo! Ted and I were joking about this whole Apple iOS thing going on right now, and I said that it's Apple iOS is not Gen X compliant. And David didn't get me right out the gate. But, you know, Gen X, most of us here, we're in that category. There might be a boomer or two. 3. But, yeah, there's a mental block, I think, in my mind about Apple. I won't say it's communist, but I'll say it's communist. Politics aside. Now I just have to get this up a little bit here. I have to give credit where credit is due because this is not a 100% original me kind of sermon. This was an inspired sermon. Well, I got to get to the initial thing where I hadn't preached in how long? A couple of years. And I told God I wasn't going to do it again unless somebody asked. And then somebody asked. Which was funny because David and I were going to get the bees was it last Friday or the Friday? Yeah, last Friday. Yeah, because that sting that I got when I was putting them in is still kind of there a little bit. So he had asked me while we were out there, or heading out, well, why haven't you preached in whatever long? I said, I wasn't going to. Well, I didn't tell you the exact reason, because I didn't want to bait you into. And I said, you know, I have reasons and whatnot. And then, coincidentally, Dennis calls me. What day was that? Wednesday? Yeah, so Tuesday, Wednesday, somewhere around there. And I'm sitting at my table, and I'm like, David has a conversation with me, Dennis. And then David asserted to me that he had no connection with Dennis calling and asking. I'm like, oh boy, here we go again. All right. So then Patty and I were watching this show called Authentic. It's put on by Voice of Prophecy with Sean Boonstra. Anybody hear of him? Anybody? It's a couple of people? All right. So we watched this presentation, and it was just like, bam! Well, you needed some content to preach on. I was just going to pull out something old from the bag and, you know, just bunt it. But no. It was one of those glaringly obvious ones where it was just like, oh, I got to do that one. You know, kind of happy that I got a message to deliver, but, you know, one of those ones where it's like, that one, no. So here we are. And I didn't bring a backup plan, so we're going to just run with it. Let's see. Yeah, this whole technology thing. But anyway. Okay. Today we're going to take a look at the 9th commandment. The one that talks about lying. And today I'm going to show you what the commandment might actually say about you. Yeah, come out swinging, right? We've all gone through the Decalogue of the 10 Commandments. But we're focusing on the ultimate commandment, the one that appears to prohibit lying, or at least that's the way that most modern readers think about it. But I'm going to challenge the thinking on that for just a bit, because it's not really talking about simple falsehood per se. It's talking about a specific class of falsehoods, namely the lies we tell in order to devalue other people. You know how you take somebody down a notch? The commandment itself simply states, "You shall not bear false witness against your neighbor." Now, if you read the rest of the Bible, you'll discover that it places a really high premium on basic honesty. But the 9th commandment is specifically talking about guarding your neighbor's reputation. And I can't help but do this. No, wrong button. Sorry. Up. It's not on there. All right. So we don't get the fun presentation. It's not really that dynamic. I mean, I just had a couple slides that flipped and whatever. My politics don't matter. Based on the last election cycle, politics, let's not really get into it, but I'm going to touch on it. I wish more preachers would just keep their political preferences to themselves, too. After all, you're supposed to be preaching the gospel, and when you weave current events and politics into your preaching, you're essentially alienating half of your potential audience. I mean, if they don't like your politics, they're just going to tune you out when you talk about Jesus. Now, that doesn't mean a preacher can't weigh in on moral issues, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't promote a cause like saying religious liberty, because, after all, the freedom that we all have to stand up in this country and go door to door and knock on people's doors and say, even though it says no soliciting, because people don't understand what the word soliciting means, and offer the free gift of salvation. Here's a book, it's free, I'm not selling. So ultimately it depends on how free our nation happens to be. But when it comes to general political preferences for preachers, silence really is golden. Now, all that being said, the latest round of political campaigns here in the U.S. Had me thinking quite a bit about the 9th commandment, because it forbids telling lies about other people. And unfortunately, the trend in recent decades has completely ignored that principle. When you're out schlepping for votes, that's right, I used the word schlepping. If y'all want to look it up, it's a great word. Candidates on both sides appear to love taking any brief statement and playing a game of gotcha with it, any video clip that potentially makes the opponent look bad, and they run with that, which is something you'd kind of expect a politician to do. But far too often, they're sharing an edited version, carefully designed to make it look far worse than it really was. And these people know full well that they're twisting the facts. But that doesn't seem to matter when the only objective appears to be winning. And honestly, you'd have a hard time convincing me that a lot of political candidates don't know that they're twisting the facts. They're just too twisted. After all, anybody with access to Google or DuckDuckGo can check their claims in less than 30 seconds. And I guess what really worries me about all this is that far too many people seem to be getting comfortable with the idea that the end always justifies the means. No matter what you say, lying is fine as long as you win. And I guess I can partly understand it. I mean, if you're going to run for office, you need a job, right? And spend all that money, you really do need to highlight the ways your opponent wouldn't be the ideal candidate. Pointing that kind of stuff out does seem like fair game, but lying about it, taking your opponent's statements out of context, or knowingly spreading falsehood, that's wrong. And to quote a notable psychologist, Jordan Peterson, morally speaking, nobody ever really gets away with anything. Evil deeds are always guaranteed to catch up with you. At some point, to quote the book of Numbers, your sin will find you out. I mean, you might actually not get caught, and you might even get to the very end of your career without anybody knowing what you did. Or at least they can't prove it. But your own heart, it'll never forget. Cheating your way through life with manufactured falsehood is going to take a toll on you. I can pretty much guarantee that it might be years down the road, but it will catch you. It might even lead to things like anxiety or guilt, or some other mental health challenge. After all, lying can be downright exhausting. You have to remember that the last lie you told, so you can substantiate it by the next lie you tell, and the one after that, and the one after that, so that you can seem consistent. Look at the theory of evolution, lie upon lie. So many lies that people have PhDs in lying. Then they understand the whole mountain of lies, and they got degrees in these things. It's a lot of mental stress, to be honest, that honest people don't have to deal with, and it's going to demand a price from you, because it's simply not the right way to live. You're always going to know that you wronged somebody, or that you didn't earn your own station in life, or you got there dishonestly. It's really, really hard to live an authentic human life when you're in the habit of living a lie. But now let's drop the politics, because it's just too easy. They're too easy of a target. We all love to pick on them because they're the low-hanging fruit. Their lies are easy to spot. I mean, after all, how do you know when a politician is lying? Their mouth is moving. Because they live in the public spotlight. So instead, maybe let's talk about you. Ready? Get your seatbelt on. Just how careful do you think you are when it comes to guarding the reputation of others? It's a pretty big question, because if you think about it, a person's reputation is really their most valuable possession. Money and property come and go pretty easy, and so do things like power and fame. But the one thing that follows you all the way through life, that'd be your character. And the sad thing about character is that so many people love to believe nasty rumors. It gives them a sense of Schadenfreude, which, yeah, I used a German word. It literally translates to damage joy. It's a sadistic way of living. It lets them say, okay, my life isn't perfect, but at least I'm not like that individual. It's like that story Jesus told about the Pharisee and the tax collector praying in the temple. You probably remember. The Pharisee looks at the tax collector, a man that everybody hates, because he works for the Roman government, and the Pharisee says, God, I thank you that I'm not like other men. It's a way of reassuring yourself that you might be a little bit rotten, but it's not that serious, because there's other people out there worse than you. But just for a moment, think about all the little crumbs of information you leave behind every time you go out and do something, absolutely anything. And ask yourself if a dedicated gossip would be able to collect that information and make something of it that they wanted to. Believe me, it happens. And who's got Facebook? How many of you go back and delete your history of posts when you've, 5 years later after you said, I shouldn't have done that? A worst case scenario happened to a close friend of mine some years ago. So ask yourself, how often have you distorted what somebody else is doing or saying? You might not actually write articles or appear on TV shows, but you talk about people. Sometimes you wait until you're in your car going home. You and your spouse, or you and your friends, after you leave the venue when you were hanging out with these people, and then you start verbally assassinating the people you were just visiting. And how often do you bend the truth or highlight things that people say in a way that makes them look bad? Or distort what they actually said? How often do all of us that even inadvertently, I mean, how many times can you recount something that somebody said verbatim, or without putting a hint of any of your own inflection into it? Honestly, I think we all do it because we're all self-interested, and we're constantly trying to appropriate everything around us to suit our agendas. We want other people to endorse what we do, or what we believe, because somehow we think that gives our ideas more credibility. And we'll co-opt other people's words and actions to make it look like they support us when they don't. Like the video of Billy Graham, not really endorsing the church. It's another case of bearing false witness. You know, there's a sense in which the 9th commandment is kind of tied to the 6th, the one that deals with murder. The Apostle John in those 3 little letters over by the book of Revelation reminds us of hating people is actually a form of murder. I mean, just listen to this. It's from 1 John 3:15. It says, "Everyone who hates his brother is a murderer, and you know that no murderer has eternal life abiding in him." So how in the world does hating somebody make you guilty of murder? Well, for starters, living in the world of hate and anger, it's like going to shorten your own life, because when you can't forgive people, it can really do a number on your mental health. Listen to the statement from the folks at Psychology Today, and I think what they're saying is really pretty accurate. It was a website, and it said, anger too easily or frequently mobilized can undermine relationships or damage physical health in the long term. Prolonged release of the stress hormones that accompany anger can destroy neurons in the areas of the brain associated with judgment and short-term memory and weaken the immune system. There was also a Stanford University, 1996. I got it from Ray Cook. He did a sermon here some time ago. Stanford University did a study on complaining. If a person complains for 30 minutes or more a day, it actually damages their memory and emotional development. Negativity is just bad. Don't mean to be down on it. And then it continues a little bit later saying that heart rate and blood flow increase in the tense muscles that can compromise the immune system and cardiovascular system, which can even shorten a lifespan when sustained. So for starters, living in a state of anger or resentment can do a real number on your health, to the point where actually shortening your life is kind of like smoking cigarettes would. Which means that in some ways, hatred becomes a really slow form of suicide, and that would be self-murder. But of course, hating someone else also takes a big toll on that person, which is how the business of bearing false witness is linked to the sin of murder. If you're hating someone to the point where they know you hate them and they feel it, well, that's obviously going to put a dent in their quality of life. And then when you start projecting your hatred in front of other people, well, now you're attacking that person's public value. You're diminishing them in the eyes of others. And that can have a tremendous impact on their well-being. I mean, let's just do a little bit of self-check, and I'll warn you, this isn't going to be easy. It's going to step on all of your toes. Have you ever talked down about somebody that you work with? Just because you didn't personally like them? Or you'd rather not have them around as a coworker? I've done it. Yeah. Have you ever heard that somebody is up for a promotion, but you think you deserve the promotion? So instead of just selling yourself to management, instead of promoting your own skills or qualities, you could criticize the other candidate, hoping that HR will see them in a negative light. Or let's be really brutally honest, have you ever felt threatened by somebody else's obvious talent, or their ability to make friends, or their looks, or their money, or just about anything, and you felt the need to take them down a little bit? Have you ever managed to convince somebody, or just turn against the person you hate, or to just turn against the person you hate? Maybe even cut them off entirely. Or have you ever said something about somebody that wasn't really a direct attack, but it was still clearly designed to raise questions about that person, such as, hey, you know, Mike really knocked it out of the park with that sales report yesterday. And then you say, you think that was an amazing report? Really? Just a little inflection. You know the kind of thing I'm talking about. I think we're all guilty of this at some level because, as we've already mentioned, we're all a little bit egocentric. And I'm not even convinced that we do it consciously most of the time. What the Bible is telling us to do is deliberately guard other people's reputations, which falls in with the golden rule, the one that Jesus taught us. So whatever you wish that others would do to you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. Now I know it's not easy sometimes because some people are really profoundly unlikable. I've worked with some of them. They're abrasive, they're dishonest. They use people. Whatever the issue is, it's precisely that terrible person who's going to give you an opportunity to learn what the ninth commandment is really about. I mean, it's easy to keep the commandments while everything's going along. I mean, how many of you had to go to your employer and say, I can't work on Saturday anymore? Some of us didn't have that opportunity, where some of us had to actually lay it down on the line and say, I can't work this day. Some people got it easy, some people don't. We all get our little trials sometimes. But while everything's going well, it's easy to avoid becoming what the Bible calls a talebearer when you're dealing with people you like. But if the commandments are just a set of fair weather social guidelines for when everything's going well, then they really don't matter much if you think about it. It's when you find yourself swimming against the current of life and things are really, really hard. Well, that's when keeping the commandments can become a bit of a challenge. But it's also at that point that they really start to make sense. I mean, it's easy to keep from murdering or plundering people you like. It's easy to avoid adultery when you're getting along with your spouse. But when you don't like somebody, the rules can suddenly seem a little bit more challenging. I mean, of course, you're not going to spread rumors about your wife or kids because you like them, at least hopefully. But what about those people? The people that rub you the wrong way all the time, the ones who irritate the daylights out of you. What about those people? Here's the problem that emerges. When you start spreading lies about others, it's almost impossible to clean up the damage you do. The way human nature works is that once you've convinced somebody not to like somebody else, well, that impression can be really hard to undo. I remember this guy I met 6 years ago who became a victim of some really brutal gossip. Somebody fairly close to him started telling a story. The story grew and changed and grew and changed several times till he lost his job and credibility. It's like cutting open a pillow in the wind. There's no chance of getting all the feathers back. I know the story wasn't true, but the damage had already been done. So there was the perpetual question mark over this guy's reputation. And it put a massive dent in his quality of life. But now let's get a little deeper, because I'm convinced that the bigger victim of bearing false witness would be God himself. And it's on this point that the ninth commandment is also related to the third one, which tells us not to take God's name in vain. Yeah. There are people who love to get online and talk badly about God, but what they're really doing is repeating stories that they heard from somebody else. Turns out when you actually sit down with the people and talk to them about these things, they never really actually read the Bible. They're just regurgitating something they heard from somebody else. They're trying to pass themselves off as being smart, somebody who's in the know, and they're not. But and what they're really doing is bearing false witness. But worse than that, when Christians behave badly, they're actually bearing false witness about the character of God. When somebody sees them behaving badly, you already know what the world is going to say. If that's what Christianity is, I don't want any part of it. People blame God for the person's behavior, which means that the Christian is now bearing false witness through, not through words, but through their actions. Because you don't actually have to say something to spread falsehood. There's a famous passage over in the book of James that gives us a pretty good understanding of the kind of damage we can do when we're not intentionally trying to guard the reputations of other people. That was a long sentence for one breath. Here's what it says. This is from James chapter 3, and it begins in verse 2. For we all stumble in many ways. That's a pretty honest assessment. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. I wish I could live up to that standard, or at least, come close. But I'll say this, I'm still working on it. The verse continues, if we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large, they are driven by strong winds, but they are guided by a small rudder. Wherever the will of the pilot directs, so also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. All these fires that were in Colorado, for instance. Apparently they were set by somebody's little campfire, and it was left unattended. At least that's what they say. By the end of the day, more than 8,000 acres was burned. 125 square miles. To frame this for you, if you go from Detroit to Port Austin to Cadillac, and Cadillac to Battle Creek, and then back to Detroit, that's 125 square miles. That's how much area was burned. Forest fires are really hard to control, especially when it's dry and windy. And if the wind suddenly blows the wrong way, the fire is going to spread faster than you can imagine. You're just not going to control what happens. And what James is telling us in that the same thing happens with the stories we tell. It's easier to spread those stories than contain them. And when it's over, the damage can be unthinkable. Lost homes, dead victims, and ugly scars in the forest, or in the case of gossip, permanent scars on somebody's reputation. So, where you and I are tempted to think that rumors are just a minor offense, James takes the opposite position. They're really a form of murder. If I steal your car, you can always replace it, or I can give it back to you. But if I steal your reputation, if I damage your social value, you might never fully recover. I've actually diminished your quality of life, which is a little like killing you very slowly. James continues, he says, and the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird or reptile of the sea can be tamed, and has been tamed by mankind. But no human being can tame the tongue. In other words, you and I have a much bigger problem in our mouths than we do with the wild animals who wander into our yards from time to time. But ultimately, those kind of encounters are much less damaging than the damage we can wreak with our own speech. He continues, and he's still talking about the human tongue when he says, it is a restless evil full of deadly poison. With that, we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth comes blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not be so. So now James really carries it all the way into the moral end zone. You cannot call yourself a good Christian if you use the power of speech to worship God on the weekend, but then you use it to rip people apart during the week. Those people you're attacking, they were also made in the image of God, just like you were. They have incredibly high value to God, just like you do. And no matter how much you don't like those people, that doesn't change God's mind. He still loves them and loves them unconditionally. So either you align yourself with the way God treats that person, or you become guilty of breaking the 9th commandment. I mean, let's just think about this. If anybody has the absolute right to point out somebody's faults, that's God. And from time to time, you'll notice that he actually does that. Whenever his people were in danger of losing their way or violating the covenant, God sent prophets to set them straight. But here's what I want you to notice. While God has the right, he still tends to favor us in ways that we don't deserve. One of my favorite passages in the whole Bible comes from Paul's letter to the Romans, because it says something really, really profound. This is Romans chapter 5, beginning in verse 6, where the Bible says, "For while we were still weak at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one will scarcely die for a righteous person, though perhaps for a good person one would dare even to die. But God shows his love for us, that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." Now, there's a lot of material in that statement from Paul. Personally, I find that chapter 5 of Romans was completely life-changing. Here's what I want you to notice for today, though. God did not wait for you to get things right before he decided he wanted to save you. Christ did not die for perfect people. He died for sinners. While we were still sinning, Christ died for us. I think maybe some of the most incredible material found anywhere in the Bible might be in those places where God speaks about his own people in really glowing terms. And it's remarkable because you and I both know that we don't deserve that. And what God is asking from us in return for all that love and attention is that we model that same kind of love when it comes to our fellow human beings. Those other people are made in the image of God, just like you and I, and God wants them to be in his kingdom. You and I have no right to badmouth anybody. Not even if that person not even if what you're saying about that person is true. I mean, imagine having God list all your negative qualities. You know, the picture of the scroll rolling out, you know. It just gives you a list of, with bullet points. How long do you think that is? That list would be if God was making it. You know, you got to wonder what kind of world we'd be living in if everyone actually made an effort to boost each other instead of always attacking. Imagine how much nicer social media would be and how civilized government could be. And I'm not really talking about honest debate. I mean, there should be always room for honest disagreements. Because if we don't have disagreements, then, you know, things don't get done. Go to a board meeting. The practice of going after a person instead of that person's position, philosophers would call an ad hominem attack, and is widely recognized as a logical fallacy. If you resort to that, you've already lost. There's also other logical fallacies, if people don't know. An appeal to emotion and an appeal to authority are also. If you resort to that, you've already lost. You're hoping people will think poorly of the person, and because of that, go and dismiss their argument. And it's a dishonest way of conducting business. I mean, just try to imagine what kind of election cycle we might have if people really just stuck to the issues and always told the truth. Imagine the kinds of good and honest people that might actually be willing to serve the public if that's the environment we lived in. I'm actually convinced that a lot of good people are shying away from public service because of the way they know that their family is going to be dragged through the mud should they seek a public office. And sadly, I'm not convinced that we're going to be able to change that a whole lot. The Bible doesn't indicate society is getting better as time moves along. In fact, it's saying that it's going to get worse, much worse, like Sodom and Gomorrah and that kind of worse. That doesn't let you off the hook, though. Even if everybody else is doing it, even if everybody else is breaking all the commandments, you're not supposed to. You're supposed to reveal the love of God in this world. They're supposed to be able to see the character of God in your life. And I get it. I know it's not easy. I mean, I got a list of the same flaws as you and other people. Some worse ones, probably, more than likely. And I'd be lying if I told you that I've never broken a commandment or the others, but I also know that in the long run, it's well worth representing God in your everyday transactions. Go back and read some of the stories you find in the Bible. Someone like Daniel, a lowly captive, because he was always honest and he always spoke highly of the Babylonian king when he addressed him. He was always regarded highly by multiple kings of multiple empires. Well, in the end, he was trusted. When the real trouble started to emerge, be that person. Be the person whose character is trustworthy, the one people turn to when there are real problems. Amen.